SaaS Therapy.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of SaaS Therapy, the show where we help you save your most important business relationships, your customers. My name is Todd Kirk. I am your host. I am joined by the animated, the gumptious, and the sometimes coddish Casey Trujillo. Casey, we're glad you're here.
Oh my gosh, Mr. Todd Kirk. Every episode you impress me with your vocabulary. That book I bought you for Vocabulary for Dummies on the bathroom is definitely working. I can see that. Thank you for that.
It is working well. It is working well. Casey, we're glad you're here, but more importantly, we are really, really excited to invite and to recognize this week's guest. We have on today Jenelle Friday, who is the founder of LionheartCS. It's a consulting company that offers EQ training and enablement programs, including an awesome 12-week boot camp that hopefully she'll tell us a little bit about today. And, you know, with her background in client success and helping people, even people in sales and product and EQ is just, I think, something we've had enough time to spend with Jenelle to know that she's super passionate about it. So I'm really excited to have her on the program. So Jenelle, welcome to SaaS Therapy.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. And I can already tell it's going to be a great episode with some SaaS. So I'm in, man. I'm in.
That's always our aim.
Yes, the audience, obviously some know you. You have a great presence on social media. Some of our audience members do not. So we always like people to get a little bit more about your personality. So we play a game of Would You Rather. We'd love for you to answer, obviously, one of the choices. And if you ever want to give background of why you chose what you chose, it also helps the audience know you a little bit better. So,
okay.
All right, we got 3 questions. The first question is, would you rather live under the sea or in space?
Oh, under the sea. Little Mermaid fan since I was a kid. Plus, I was a swim team member at like the age of 7 through my teens. Yeah, that was easy.
Okay, all right.
Whales, jellyfish. Come on, man. Who wouldn't want to do that?
I mean, space is kind of empty, you know. At least there's a bunch of life down there to be friends with in the ocean. So.
Well, space is cold. Space is dark. Space is, you know, I don't need to catch some weird ass virus that's going to turn me into a freaking alien. So no, I'm good with what's underwater.
I'm also impressed with Todd because I know he would live in space. So I'm thankful that he's refrained himself from geeking out on that question. Okay. Question number 2. Would you rather have eyes in the back of your head or be able to taste with your fingers?
Ooh. I don't think I want to taste with my fingers. That means that like you touch, you know how you just get stuff on your fingers because you're doing things and that like would end up in your mouth. No, eyes in the back of my head. I don't need weird things going on. Yeah, no.
Yeah, that one makes more sense. As I thought through that question, I'm like, oh yeah, that's kind of, that wouldn't end well. Okay. Would you rather have the ability to be invisible or to read people's minds?
Oh. I don't think I want to read people's minds. I think the things that come out of our mouths are enough to handle. I think if we could read people's minds, it would be bad. So I'm going to go with invisible. Then I can sneak up on my nephews whom I love and mess with them really bad. And yeah, I think that'd be really fun.
Fantastic.
You know, maybe that's a good segue into our discussion today. I don't know if Casey did that intentionally, but it sometimes feels like that last question helps. And I always like to make it really awkward by calling attention to the fact that he was trying to make it a natural transition. But, you know, when you think about emotional intelligence, the ability to read people's minds and not wanting to read people's minds, you know, for me, a big part of emotional intelligence is being able to recognize and empathize and feel what other people are feeling and know how to react in a good way. And so, you know, I'm really excited about this conversation because EQ is a concept that some different industries talk about, but it's never something that I ever hear it brought up in the SaaS world. And so I guess help us understand why you got passionate about this topic and why you think it's important for people in the SaaS world to actually think about emotional intelligence.
Sure. So I've been in CS for little under 14 years. And, you know, building relationships, connecting with people was kind of always how I was in my personal life. So I just felt like CS was an extension of who I was already. But in 2020, I went through something incredibly drastic and traumatic. I learned that basically the first 40 years of my life, I had believed a really terrible lie. And when I found out the truth, it halted me in my tracks. I can admit I had a suicide attempt. So if you're dealing with that, I definitely can empathize. Um, and I had to ask myself really difficult questions like, how do I want to proceed forward? Because I can't proceed forward the way that I would have now knowing the truth. I had to stop and evaluate the impact that the truth had on my life and how I was going to move forward. And so in therapy, my therapist gave me a book about EQ. And I consumed that sucker the same day. Like I couldn't put it down. And it was like a light bulb went off of like, this is what I'm missing. I am not self-aware. I am not managing and effectively um, managing my emotions, my how they come out of me, and how severe they are, or how passionate they are. And so as I was learning and developing myself, because I'm in a state where I want to be better than I was yesterday, and knowing that I couldn't go back to the old mentality to shape a new mentality, it requires knowing yourself. That old classic saying of thine own self to be true. If you don't know who you are, I didn't know what my triggers were. I didn't know why certain things would get me going. I had terrible self-image, and my imposter syndrome was screaming self-hatred and just bad. And so I was mentoring and coaching at the time. So I started to teach what I was learning about EQ to the group of people that I was mentoring. And they were the ones that kind of said, you need to scale this because the things they're talking about and teaching, I'm not finding in other areas. And really, I think what it comes down to is I've consumed most of everything you're going to find on EQ. And it's very conceptual, like you say. I didn't see a lot of tools that went, okay, well, I'm not self aware. How do I become self aware? Right? There's not a lot of how to things. There's assessments and there's people that talk about it. So I just decided to be like, well, what did I do? What information did I glean at the right time in the right order? And how can I then convey that to somebody? And so I just have taken the time to put together this 12-week program that's solely meant for offering you structure and a guide to figuring out who you are, self-awareness, learning tools and techniques and proven scientific methodologies about the mind-body connection and how you physically manage yourself during stressful times or during anxiety to take power back, because you're not a victim to your thoughts or emotions. But if you don't have the tools to grasp that and to manage them, it makes that really difficult. So I've sort of just poured myself into this process because I myself have had the most incredible professional and personal development because of EQ. And it really came from asking the question, who am I? And not being able to answer that, or the answer that I got, I didn't like, and I wanted to change it. And so now realizing the power of that, I just want to help remove blinders for other people to find their inner superhero and realize how strong you really are if you can get rid of the negative and release some of those things that keep us from seeing what we're truly capable of.
Janelle, thank you for sharing and being vulnerable in what you're saying there. I think one of the things that I hear people talk about, and maybe they have a tough time drawing how this can help them in their work.
Yeah.
I have tough kids at home, or I'm in a rocky relationship with my partner. And yes, this resonates, but how would this actually help me at work? So for people that can't make that connection between what I'm dealing with in my life and then what I'm dealing with at work, sometimes we separate ourselves and we almost are like two different people at times.
Yeah.
Why would I want to invest time in emotional intelligence with what I'm doing at work? Can you help us make
Yeah.
that connection a little bit better?
Yeah, I think I can use myself as the example. So when I wasn't self-aware and I would be in a really stressful situation, my face, my tone, my body language, and the use of my hands would indicate where I was really at. There's an old proverb that says, from the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Even without words, what's happening inside of you is radiating from you. how you look, how you talk, how you position yourself, how your body language is, the phrases that you use, the tone of your voice, all of that contributes to how we are perceived, right? So if I don't know who I am and I don't know why I'm triggered, or I don't know why my emotions are high today, and I'm trying to hide it with the things that I say, it's going to be written all over my face and written all over my body language and the tone that I use. And I think we all have worked with business professionals who are not self-aware. I'm not going to name names. I'm not going to have anybody call anybody out, but we all have worked with those people. And so what we need to realize is that is the human condition. We are conditioned to just, and especially if you're being authentic, how I am is how I'm going to be. And, that's kind of your problem to deal with. That was my mentality of, well, this is just how I am. And you should know my intentions are good. So if I talk with my hands and it makes you uncomfortable, deal with it. That was my approach. I've since then learned that if I'm emotionally triggered, it's my problem. If I have emotional stress because of a personal issue or something else and I'm trying to hide it and it's coming out of me, that's my problem. I need to be accountable for how I come across to people. And the way you treat other people is a direct reflection of how you treat yourself. The things you say to yourself, how you talk to yourself in the mirror, what you think about yourself when you're insecure. All of those self-hatred, insecurity, imposter syndrome thoughts come out of you, whether you think they are or not. And so when we are not showing empathy, when we're not able to give room for someone else to disagree with us and still maintain respect and kindness and empathy, it's a reflection of what's going on inside of us. And that's what I realized. And so, if you're an individual who maybe you've had people tell you come across a certain way and you're like, I don't get it, I don't see it, or you struggle with really strong emotions and you think that you're doing an okay job of hiding those emotions, I'm going to tell you probably not as much as you think, because truth is in the eye of the beholder. I can be as nice as I want to be in my mind in how I'm delivering information, but my everything else about my physicality is going to give me away. And so I think people think they hide it better than they realize they do. Does that help a little bit? I mean, that's involved in or relationship building. I think skills like active listening, we talk about it, but we're not teaching it, because when someone tells me that they're really good at active listening and then I kind of put them through a test, it's very clear that they really don't know how to do that. And I think we assume that because you have this title of a senior CSM, oh, you should know how to actively listen. You should know how to effectively communicate. You should know how to build trust with somebody new or aggressive or uncomfortable. People don't know those things because we do not live in a world that is training and educating on these kinds of soft skills. And it's not just a soft skill, it has to radiate from within you. So this isn't just a soft skill that you're going to glean. This is transformation from the inside out so that those things are actually authentic coming from you, because you can't really fake them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jenelle, well, first I was going to make a joke and say I'm an amazing active listener.
Yes.
So I'm looking forward to your assessment sometime
Okay, are you ready
soon
for the
to prove
test
how
now, Todd?
terrible I am. Is it a short test? If it is, we could do it.
No,
But if it's a long test,
but
we'll
you're in
have
the
to do it
tribe
together.
though, so you get a pass. All right.
No, it's funny though. Your very first comment you made when you're talking about how other people perceive us, it made me think back to a friend that I met my freshman year of college. So we're going back a long ways. But when I first, I had a friend who actually became a great friend. But one of the first things they told me after like about halfway through the school year said, Todd, when I first met you, I hated your guts. Like I just thought you were the worst. And what's interesting is I think that sometimes for me, that was like a holy cow. I was totally unaware of the fact that I was having a negative impact on someone. And, I tend to wear people down. But I don't always make the best first impression. And so your point about like, you can't really fake it. I'm curious when it comes to, for me, when I think about emotional intelligence, and I'm not a master at this idea at all. In fact, I don't, you'd probably correct me on a lot of stuff if I tried to go deep on any of these types of topics, but like, it seems like there's two sides of this, right? It's about how we interact with ourselves and how we interact with other people, and how we perceive other people and how they perceive us and how we perceive ourselves. And so there's all of that going on. Yep. And so for you, like if someone is unsure if they're good at this, right? If they are like also having that, oh, I remember that time I made a really bad first impression on someone. Where would you recommend people start? Is it with self-awareness? Is it with where do you start this journey?
It is self-awareness. It's a good question, because if you think about it, that there's let me do basics.
Sure.
So there's 4 pillars in EQ. There's 2 primary themes. The first theme is love yourself. So those pillars are self-awareness and self-regulation or self-management, right? The 2 pillars are the 2 pillars that focus on the other theme of loving others is social awareness and relationship management. So if you think about that, if you're not self-aware, you can't manage your emotions or regulate your body. If you're not self-aware, you're not socially aware to understand how you impact others and how others impact you. And if you're not self-aware, managing relationships is going to be really tough, right? So we start with self-awareness, and self-awareness is not, hey, did you know that when you talk seriously and you don't smile, you come across like this? Yes, that's self-awareness, but that's not the self-awareness we're talking about. The self-awareness I'm talking about is, okay, if I said, Casey Todd, remove your spouse, your kids, your job, your house, your bank account, your responsibilities, your hobbies, the things you love, who are you? What's left?
It's like the
If
Maslow's self-actualization type level almost.
yes, because again, that question provokes but when I say, well, who are you? Most people say, oh, I'm a mom, or I would say I'm from Washington. I'm a stepmom. I'm a great aunt. I'm married. I'm a dog mom. We love fishing. Like that's pretty normal, but that's not who you are. Who you are is made up of your ability to bounce back and thrive and be resilient. Are you brave? Are you kind to other people? Are you able to sit in silence and talk to yourself in a kind manner? Can you look at yourself in the mirror and say, I love you, flaws and ugliness and all? Because we all have ugly, right? And so we start with those questions, because once you start to answer those questions, even if you don't like the answer. So for me, when I asked myself that question, I didn't like my answer. Like, I am judgmental. I am hypocritical. I am superior in my mindset. I didn't like those answers, but you have to answer them honestly, because that's where you start. You start by saying, well, this is who I am right now. Then the question is, if you want to change, if you see areas of your life that are like, ew, I don't like that about myself, then that's where you become self-aware, and you work through this process of answering, well, what is it that, if I have an emotional trigger, let's say maybe I have a conversation with somebody and they bring up a topic and I'm immediately emotionally triggered. If you're mindful, we talk about mindfulness. Mindfulness is not just being mindful of activities or things that you say. Mindfulness is your body or your brain produces a thought. Maybe that thought for me is, I'm having an ugly day. I don't feel attractive. That thought, between that thought and when your body feels all the emotions that are generated by that thought, there's a process. There's a process of your brain has a thought. And if you know who you are, if my thought is, I'm really ugly today, and I'm mindful, I capture that thought and I weigh it against who I know myself to be. Who am I? What is the truth about my life? Is it valuable? Is it beneficial? Is it uplifting? Is it kind? I want to treat other people that way. So first I got to treat myself that way. Right. So I grab that thought and go, okay, well, I have a husband who's madly in love with me. I have nephews that brush my hair and love my nails. I think I'm an attractive, I think I'm okay. So I get rid of it. I release that thought because it doesn't fit in the framework that I have decided to have it. So the self-awareness piece is absolutely critical, because if we don't start there, then none of the other things around EQ really matters, to be honest, because then you're just guessing. You think you know where you are, you think you know how you feel, you think you know how you're driven, but all of us get caught off guard, and all of us have bad moments where like, oh, I kind of really, I busted that shit pretty good because I got caught, right, doing something or saying something that I didn't really mean and had nothing to do with this circumstance or this person. And we also say too, we take out our emotions and our negative thoughts on the people we love the most. So how many times has your spouse said, don't take it, why are you taking out on me? You had a bad day at work and I'm the right. It's that moment where you realize we communicate how we feel, whether we say it or not.
Yeah.
And our feelings are based on our thoughts because the brain connects to the nervous system. So literally my thought of I'm ugly today sends a message to a nerve in my nervous system, and that nerve goes, oh, well, now I'm depressed and I don't know that I'm worth anything and nobody's going to want to talk to me. And it then sends chemicals to the rest of the nervous system that produces emotions, depression, fear, anxiety, and those emotions now impact my behavior for the rest of today. So literally to stop that cycle, it starts with your thoughts and how you talk to yourself. And no one ever really taught me how to do that, right? We're not really taught through that. We tend to lean in and accept the negative so quickly. And I want to flip that script. It's hard to do, but it's worth it, I think.
Yeah, it's so worth it. And I think one of the things is it almost becomes habit forming in some regard, right? So unconsciously, I might not even recognize I'm having those thoughts.
Yes.
And it's become part of my identity. So as I've started down this journey of emotional intelligence, and Jenelle, I shared this with you at the conference that we were recently at. It was, there was again, they never listened to this podcast, so I don't feel bad in sharing the story. But I have a brother-in-law and a sister-in-law who, when I sit down with them, I just have a tough time. And so we were on a family vacation, and everyone was there, and they're about ready to sit down with me, and I feel this tightening in my chest, and I feel just like those little pricklies in your all over your head and everywhere, and I'm starting to get like anxiety. I'm starting to get frustrated. And we haven't even had a conversation yet. They're just sitting down, and I paused, I breathed, and I asked myself this question: why am I feeling what I'm feeling? And so I stopped the conscious behavior, and I stopped and I said, why am I feeling what I'm feeling? And this little voice whispered to me and said, because you're jealous. And I was like, wait, I'm not jealous. And this is, it's so funny, right? You're having this conversation with yourself. And for people out there in the audience today, if you're saying, I've never talked to myself, you were talking to yourself while I was explaining this story. Like we all talk to ourselves.
Yeah.
So I'm
Little bit of a
talking to
truth pill
myself,
there.
and I'm like, I'm not jealous. What would I be jealous of? And then just as fast, my subconscious started to tell me all the things I was jealous of them about. And I'm like, you're right. That is why I'm having these feelings, is I am jealous of them. And all of a sudden, everything just kind of went whoosh, and it released. And then I asked myself the question, well, what do I want to do about it? Do I want to stay in that drama? Am I actually getting something off of that drama? Am I getting like a little dopamine hit every time that I'm just living in drama? Or do I actually want to have a relationship with my sister-in-law, my brother-in-law that's better than it is today? And that's what I had to decide. And so I think that's the value of like you said, with your thoughts, with that's what self-awareness is, really having the pause, because we react so much and we don't think we do, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a big thing I've learned. So as you're thinking about this, Jenelle, and you're thinking about, okay, I am judgmental. Do we sometimes maybe label things though as bad and good? Because maybe if I'm a police officer, I need to be judgmental. Like I need to be really good at that. So would you give any advice to our audience in saying you might recognize something as something you're what you're seeing you're bad at, but that might actually be a gift that you need. And so how do you balance that to not like pigeonhole down something that maybe is not even something that's actually a true emotion or identity, or is actually could be a positive identity or emotion?
Yeah.
How do you help people come to grips with understanding that just because you think you're this doesn't mean that's either good or bad right now? You're just actually just seeing where you're at. I don't know if that made sense and what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, the whole process that you just went through, you could teach that. You don't even need me, because that was brilliant, right? Capturing that thought, understanding your body is reacting, because stress in our bodies presents very specifically. And so when you recognize that right away, you're like, oh boy, I got something coming on. I need to rethink what's happening. That's a skill set that's hard to do, Casey. So I want to applaud you for that. When it comes to judgments of yourself, again, we're judging ourselves because we're comparing ourselves to others, right? Comparison is the thief of joy. And we assign assumptions upon others. So we assume that when I'm having the conversation and my manager is saying certain things that I don't like, that they're thinking about me this way, or they're coming out with a preconceived idea of who I am, what my value is, what my worth is, all those things. But we have no idea what the other person is really thinking. We don't know what their intent or perceptions are. We all we know is what's in our heads, right? And so I think I find myself being judgmental of others because I assume that they're being judgmental in return. When women, and I'm speaking as a general, and not everyone's guilty of this, but as a female in business, I know it's certainly true for me. When I go to a conference and I see women who are dressed to the nines, I'm like, oh, I'm so jealous of that. I bet she's a raving man. She's not going to talk to me. And why in the world am I thinking like that? But it happens. And so again, it's we're pre-assigning judgment from somebody else that forces us to defend and become judgmental ourselves. Or judgment comes from a place of fear. Most negative emotions come from fear. So if you're judging someone else, it's you're afraid that what? They're not going to accept you as is because you've put an assumption on who they think they are. You're judging someone else for behavior that you don't understand. I do that. So people that drive like idiots, that stay in the left lane going under the speed limit when it's I don't have patience, right? I'm judging because I have an idea of what the right thing to do is. Okay? What I've learned in that mentality is everyone's definition of right is different. Everyone's level of convictions on what's right or wrong, truth or false, good or bad is different. And if I assume that I'm always right, then I become isolated, closed off, judgmental, insecure, all of the above. And it took me a long time to realize that while I believe I'm right on some, like a moral conviction, what I believe is right and wrong is you shouldn't murder people. Okay, that's probably pretty common, right? But like those basic moralities are probably pretty common. Everything else is gray because truth and reality is in the beholder's eyes. So for me to make those assumptions and then assign an emotion of judgment, guilt, insecurity, jealousy is my problem, right? So it's I had to flip my thinking because my dad would say things like, if you love Jesus, everything that comes out of your mouth is true. He was very conservative that way. And it fostered this mentality that it doesn't matter what anybody else's experiences or perceptions are, mine is always accurate. And I think a lot of us feel that way to some degree about something we've learned. We've come through a tough time and we've survived it. And here's now our perspective. I respect all of that. The thing that I say to people is, okay, but if you're judging somebody else, you got to ask yourself, what are you afraid of that that person is coming from? And what assumptions are you making that's clouding your mentality to be judgmental?
Okay, so I love all of that. I want to play devil's advocate here just a little
Go
bit,
for it.
Janelle, because I
Okay.
think I would guess that some people here would say, or some people who are listening right now would probably say something to the effect of, like, that all sounds well and good, but like, in my job or in my role, I need to influence people. I need to try to change people. And that means that I'm already coming, especially if I work, like, let's say I work for a software company and my job is to get you to use my software or to get you to go through some change management process. Well, that means I'm coming presupposing that I already have the right answer and that I
Yes.
am right. And if I push too far into being agreeable and letting you continue the way that you
Yeah.
are, then
Yeah.
I'm derelict in my responsibility as your advisor or as your success manager.
Sure.
And so I'm curious, how would you answer that? Because you're right, like there is potentially I may be coming at my job may be to convince you that something is right.
Yeah.
And if I'm too agreeable and I don't challenge you enough, then I may end up in this spot where, you don't get the thing that I promised you to get. Right. So I'm just curious, how do you try to
Yeah.
balance that and this idea of being aware, but also like being able to challenge and push,
Yeah.
especially because that may be part of your job description in some cases.
Yeah, it's such a great question because the only positive way to challenge somebody is through empathy, through innate curiosity. I think if you're emotionally intelligent, you realize you're one person in this vast globe of people we have, and you're not the end all be all. So what that means for me as a CSM is if a customer needs me to educate them on something, first I need to understand, well, why do you need education? Why do you have a different definition of success than I do? Because if I assume that I know the product and I know what's going to work for them, then I'm assuming I understand their outcome or their intentions. And I think a lot of CS teams struggle with really defining that. I've heard a member of leadership say, well, our customers don't know what they need. We have to tell them what they
Yeah,
need. And I'm
right.
like, I'm sorry, what? If you're not asking the right questions to understand why did your customers purchase the product in the first place? What were the outcomes that they told their salespeople they wanted? That was why they purchased the product, because sometimes their intentions get lost in translation, right? We hear what they want, we sell them something, maybe not realizing we can't meet that expectation. So again, you got to get real with your customer and say, look, I'm here. I want to understand, why did you purchase the product? What are the goals that you have? What's the use case? What are your intents? I want to understand all of it, because then I can present a very strong, self-confident, okay, now I'm the trusted advisor. I'm the one that understands the product. Here's where we are. Here's where you said we want to get. Here's how we're going to get there. And
That's
instead of
fantastic.
coming across like a know-it-all or saying, oh, well, we just want to do whatever it takes to make you happy. Well, you can't do that. You can't fix the bugs. You can't create the product. You're never going to give the customer everything they want. But what you do is you define, okay, here's where we are today, and here's where you want to be. So now I need you to trust me to tell you that this is how we're going to get there. If we need to spend more money, we need to have that conversation. If we have the wrong product fit, let's talk about what to do about that. But if you're not asking those introspective questions and then realizing you have to come from a very strong, confident place, because that's what the customer needs from you. If I'm the customer, okay, you're hearing what I have to say, you care about what I have to say and what my experience has been,
Mm.
even if it's negative. I'm not going to come at you from a CS role being like, well, yeah, sales screwed up and I'm so sorry, because that's throwing sales under the bus. It really is. I'm here to figure out how to make you successful according to how you determine success. How do I get you there? Because then I get to step in and say, I know what I'm doing. I need you to trust me. Here's where we're going. And they can trust that because we've had that kind of relationship.
I love back in the day when I was a little kid, you would get those books, and it was just a bunch of dots. And if you follow the pattern right, an image would come out, right? And
Yeah.
so I always talk about connecting dots. It's just something I'm known for, is like, okay, let's connect dots here. And I want to connect the dots for the audience, because what you've been saying, I want to make sure they're connecting it together. Is one of the things you talked about right at the beginning is personal accountability.
Mm-hmm.
In order to get to what you just did, which was very confident, it was very empathetic in that role play. Like, I could hear the empathy in your voice. It's because you've taken accountability for your life. And I think one of the things that I think, and again, I'm going to relate this to business, is we do so much for our customers. We take away their accountability. I'm a big believer in 100% accountability, not more than 100%, because if I do too much, I'm robbing you, right?
Right.
And if I don't see where I'm at, then I'm robbing me. And so I think one of the things to connect dots for people is if you want to be like Jenelle and have that emotional intelligence, be able to challenge your customers in that way, you need to work on yourself and be self-aware. And once you've done that, then you're in a better position to help other people take responsibility for the things that they need to do. And that's with your customers. I know it sounds scary, but it actually, your best relationships you have probably with your customers are the ones where that is the case. And the
Mm-hmm.
customers you dread to get on the phone with, that renew but abuse you because they make you work 100 hours for that renewal, is because in some regard that balance is off. And so, Janelle, how Todd alluded to this a little bit, but in self-awareness and trying to understand maybe where I'm at with my customer relationships, and am I taking enough responsibility, or am I giving it up? Is there one or two principles you might, or questions, or maybe some assessments. Obviously, sign up for your boot camp, and they'll get all this. But what are some one or two freebies that you could give the audience to really help them understand? Am I taking 100% responsibility? Am I taking less than that? What would be some advice you have?
Yeah. Well, I think the first question is to ask, what's in my control?
Great question.
What am I responsible for? What's in my control? Can I control how the customer uses the product? No. Can I control the people that the customer brings into the platform as a user? No. Can I control the customer's budget, procurement process, leadership's opinion? No. What's in my control, right? So my responses are in my control. The timing of my responses are in my control. Me telling someone, okay, I'm going to handle this, and then following through with my word, that's in my control. But I can't make anybody else think or say or do anything, right? That's out of my control. And so I think you got to be introspective and say, I'm responsible for retention. I'm responsible for product upgrades or contract expansion. I'm responsible for referrals or highlighting, right, use cases, things like that, bringing in customers who are going to be testimonials. Those things are in my control. Putting time on calendar and helping educate customers and connecting them with the right people internally, that's in my control. But if I tell a customer, okay, I'm going to connect you to product, and I send them over to product and product doesn't respond, that's sort of out of my control. I can go back to the customer and say, I'm so sorry they didn't respond. I can level it up to a manager. If there's a bug and the customer has submitted a ticket request and I'm trying to solve on the back end and we're not getting anywhere, is that in my control or is it out of my control? It's really, it comes back to, I've given my word on certain things and certain things fall under my purview. And if I own and am responsible for those things, then what's outside of my control, again, like my thoughts, is I'm in control of what I'm thinking. If I let someone else's thoughts or emotions impact my perception of myself or how I interact with other people, then I've not grounded myself in self-awareness, right? We tend to take on the emotions of other people. And a good example of that is, do you cry at movies? I cry at commercials sometimes. That's not a real emotion. It's a fake emotion, but we take it on because that's the experience. But we tend to do that in our personal lives as well. Meaning, if you're sitting in a customer event and the customer is happy, but the CEO all of a sudden turns on a dime and is like, I'm not really happy with this, and I've got a bone, and here's what happens. The rest of his team, like dominoes, fall and take on that emotion and run with it. And so again, if you're self accountable, it means that as far as it's up to me, my tone is going to be kind, open, inviting, empathetic, in my control. It's in my control how I respond. And no matter what that, I mean, I've had customers scream and swear and name call. And at the beginning of my career, I didn't know how to handle that. But now I'm like, I can hear someone be that aggressive and say, okay, so if we can get the conversation back to a very respectful, kind place, I'm happy to continue that. But if our emotions stay escalated and we can't get the conversation to a respectful place, I'm going to end the conversation now. It's my own value, personal boundary. But again, that's in my control, right? So it's a hard question to ask because I think it's really easy to say, well, that's not my job. That's not my job. But my question to that statement is, well, what does your customer need from you? It might not be your job, but if nobody else is responding, are you just going to leave them hanging? Going above and beyond doesn't mean sending them swag or sending them free tickets to a conference. Going above and beyond says, if nobody else is willing to help you with this, then I'll step up and do it, because that's the relationship I want with my customer.
You know, Jenelle, there's a saying that I've always really liked, and as we've been talking today, it started to take on a little bit of a different meaning for me, which is that you can't draw water from an empty bucket. And the idea there being that normally, if you want to go, you want to go help someone else who's thirsty, you can't be thirsty yourself, right?
That's right.
And for me, I've always really liked that saying, but I always took it as this perception of, well, how do you fill a bucket? Like, it's about reading, it's about studying, it's about like intellectually engaging your brain. but we're more complex than that, right? And it's interesting because I think as an emotional creature, as an intellectual creature, as a physical creature, we have all these different elements of who we are that are all kind of at play with each other, sometimes at war with each other, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so for me at least, I think back and I think, okay, as a little kid, I was taught to brush my teeth. I was taught I should exercise and eat broccoli. Like we actually focus a whole lot on our own like physical awareness of like how our physical bodies are being maintained. Casey knows that really well because he's really healthy. He actually eats great. I don't, even though I know conceptually I should. And I think even when it comes intellectually, I know I need to learn math. I need to learn how to read. We spend a whole lot of time on that, but I don't think we do a great job as a society at educating people about how to process everything that you're talking about. And so, like, I guess what I would ask as a follow-up question here is, how do you fill the emotional bucket, right? Like, I know how to fill the physical bucket. I know how to fill the intellectual bucket, but how do you fill the emotional bucket?
Yeah. That's such a good question. And there's so many different answers, right? So one of the things that I teach a lot is EQ methodologies, EQ practical application is like a buffet. You're going to take some, you're going to leave some, and every plate is different. So what works for me isn't going to work for you necessarily, right? But at a very core basic level, there's a moment that comes in my day when I've not taken care of myself emotionally, where I'm tapped. I don't want to talk to anybody. I'm really physically, emotionally exhausted, right? You leave the end of your day, and then maybe you have a kids choir concert. Maybe you have an errand to run. Maybe you have a spouse to entertain. Maybe you're hosting dinner, right? And you're just taxed. So for me, when you talk about how do you fill your emotional tank, if we compare that to like a love language, right? Love language is visibility or visual picture is you have a tank on your back, and the tank is you receive and you give love in a very similar way, right? And if your love tank is empty, you don't really have a lot there. So from an emotional perspective, emotions actually take a physical toll on the body. So I teach about how stress is external from us. Stress happens when we're given something, it stresses us out, we work through it, the thing ends, the stress is over. Anxiety is internal and it's long term. Anxiety comes from fear that we're not good enough, we're not going to meet expectations, we're not valuable enough. I mean, just continue on that thought process. So most of us have that baseline of some sort of anxiety. That's been proven through COVID, right? My aunt works in medical insurance, and we have a shortage of mental health meds because so many people went on them during or post COVID, right? So from an emotional perspective, most of us struggle with some sort of fear, insecurity, anxiety. And long term, it has massive effects on the body. So you hold tension in your shoulders, you struggle to breathe, your palms get sweaty. The first thing is to notice when your body is telling you that you're maxed out. Your body will tell you. You have racing thoughts. You could have tightness in your chest. Your palms could be sweaty, right? There are physical indicators that your body has reached the limit every day. The first thing is to have a conversation with yourself and your body and go, well, what do I know to be true about how I feel when I'm emotionally taxed? Can I look at those warning signs early to say, oh boy, I need to put something in place? The second is to be purposeful and intentful with your time. So if you know me, you know that I'm an aunt of three. I have three nephews who I love to death. I moved here to be a full-time aunt to Colorado. And I'm constantly trying to teach them about time management, self-awareness, being kind to yourself, right? And through the day, there's this moment where it's like, if you're not being kind to yourself, but you value other people. So my husband's question was, do you love your nephews? And I'm like, I hate when he asks me questions I already know the answer to. I'm like, yes. He's like, you do anything for them? Yes. You throw yourself in front of a bullet? Yes. He goes, then why don't you do that for yourself? And I was like, I don't like that question. Next question. Like, it's the truth, right? We pour into other people, especially if you're in customer success. We care about people. We want to uplift people, but we don't do the same for ourselves, right? So I've started a habit of, in the morning, for my first 30 minutes, I drink a massive glass of water. I work on breathing to get oxygen into my lungs and to set myself up mentally through the day. Our industry has a tendency, you get on calls 7:30, 8 o'clock your time, and you go until what, 5, 6 o'clock? You're lucky if you remember to eat lunch. That is not healthy. We are not promoting a healthy working environment. 30 minutes minimum every day. You should be disconnected from your screens, turn off the music, and sit with yourself and think about, how am I doing today? How do I feel about myself today? If you're not doing it first thing in the morning, 30 minutes a day, midday, end of day, you've got to be able to go internally and ask yourself those questions, because that's when you determine, I'm tapped out. Well, why am I tapped out? Well, because I had a nightmare. My kids irritated me this morning. I had a really tough call. I'm going through a divorce. I'm selling like, what is it? Because all of those emotions are taxing, and it's like a base operating program. You have a base operating program that's operating at all times. And if your base operating program is filled with negative emotions, you don't have a lot of space left. And how we deal with negative things in our life, those emotions impact how we are emotionally with everything else. And so if you're going through really difficult things, and I've had to manage this, if you're not effectively managing your emotions in your personal life based off all the different difficult things that are happening, then you're maxing out every time you come to work already. Right? So it really is, your emotional tank is managed by you. And we don't get to say, well, this conversation happened and it's not my fault. And right.
Right.
No, you're still responsible for you. And if you know that you're stressed out and you don't know how to effectively manage that stress, then let's have a conversation. There are so many examples. I teach the butterfly hug. I teach, if you put your thumbs in your palms and you squeeze really tight, that interrupts the nervous system flow and can help with some stress management. There are physical things, because work doesn't happen right here. Thoughts happen there, but the actual work does not. It's external from us. And so I teach something called the I am statement. You come up with a statement that's a one pager of, who are you? Who am I? I'm resilient. I'm comfortable being uncomfortable, because that's where growth and change happens. I need 30 minutes a day of complete silence to make sure I'm okay. Right. And then you read it out loud in the morning. Because the other thing we know about science is that when you use more than one of your senses, that new neural pathway you're creating is strengthened. So if you read it out loud, you're seeing it, speaking it, hearing it. You have to do physical things because you are a physical being made of flesh and blood, and your body is meant to cohesively work all together. So by basing your day on just the emotions that you have or the thoughts that you have, again, you're letting your emotions and your mind run amok. And the truth is that we have to take responsibility for that. And there are methods and proven ideas to help you track and successfully manage that. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not perfect. I have days where I don't want to interact with anybody. And my husband's like, aren't you an EQ? And I'm like, shh, not today. That's to be human. But I'm just saying that I think people are just in this mentality of, well, that's how I feel. That's how I feel. Deal with it. But your feelings are subject to change, and your feelings are not necessarily based on truth. You got to examine that and ask yourself, is this true? Is this real? And if I'm going in emotionally charged already, maybe I need to be more careful about my interactions or the things that I say. Does that maybe answer that question, Todd, well enough?
I mean, I thought that was phenomenal. Yes.
Okay.
I think that my short takeaway is, they're all interrelated, right? And so if you, to care for yourself emotionally, you also have to care for yourself physically and intellectually. But it goes back to the idea of, how do you fill that bucket up? It's about telling yourself the right things. You got to think the right things and even on a consistent basis. And you mentioned some other ideas in there too, but those were all awesome. Jenelle, since we're running short on time, we always love to ask our guests one final question.
Okay.
This is SaaS therapy, right? So what's every good therapy session end with? There's some assignment, there's some homework, there's some task that you would ask people to do as a result. So if you could give our audience one piece of advice, one piece of homework, what would that be?
It would be to ask yourself the question of, who are you? You got to get rid of the external stuff, hobbies, chores, spouse, relationships, car, kids, all of it. Because you're not just a mom. You're not just a spouse. You're not just a job title. You're not just a skier or whatever. Who are you? And if it doesn't immediately come to you, if you don't have a very set, like, I'm this and I know I'm this and I know I'm this, if it's not immediate, then my challenge to you would be then that's where you start. Because if you ask me that question now, I could absolutely answer you because I've done the work to figure that out. And the other thing I want to say too is this is a heavy lift on the front end. On the front end, it's a heavy emotional lift to ask yourself some of the most difficult questions that maybe you've never asked yourself. But on the flip side, when you work through all of this, now there's no work for me because I've put in the measures in place and I've built a muscle. It's no longer difficult. If anything, I feel lighter than ever because I'm able to appropriately identify what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling. Is it true? What am I assuming about the other person? And create better circumstances. So while that question may be difficult and it feels like an emotional lift, the encouragement I want to offer is it's worth the work because what awaits for you on the other side is this place of mental freedom and joy and excitement to connect with people and a very quick, I'm not getting in the drama. I'm not feeding into that. I'm going to promote healthy in my relationships. It's a totally different mindset and it's worth the work. So.
I was waiting for Casey to say something inspiring, but he's just...
You ended it, Todd. You asked the last question. There's nothing more. I have emotional intelligence and self-awareness to know that you ended it.
And I clearly do not. So
you do. You're in the tribe. You're in the Lionheart tribe, Todd. You've got enough to make it into the tribe.
Oh, so good. Well, Jenelle, this has been wonderful. I'm pumped. I can't wait to go back and listen to this again and really look internally at myself as well, because we all need to, whether you think you're self-aware or not. It's a continuous journey, I think. So.
And it's not a destination or a prize. It's a journey. It never ends. And so, thanks for having me. Thanks for letting me talk. And to anybody who's listening, if you want to know more, you can find me on LinkedIn. Let's just have a conversation. I want to start with a convo first to get to know you. And again, just thanks for the opportunity.
SaaS Therapy is brought to you by Brainstorm, the SaaS platform for SaaS adoption. Learn more at brainstorminc.com.